Painter's Servant, 8% to fire resistance, 8% to cold resistant, 8% to lightning resistance, 33 of elemental damage converted to cold, 33% of elemental damage converted to fire, 33% of elemental damage converted to lightning. Interesting. Alright, so we're going to have AI go over a Theorycraft build with the gloves.
All right, listeners, get ready for a deep dive into Path of Exile 2, build crafting.
We've got some listener intel on unique gloves and skills.
Yeah, and we're going to break it all down for you.
These gloves are called Painter's Servant Torn Gloves.
Okay.
And they've got an interesting effect. They convert 33% of your elemental damage
33%.
to cold, fire, and lightning.
Whoa, hold on. They convert to all three elements.
That's right, all three.
That's crazy. So where does your mind go with this right away? What kind of builds plop into your head when you hear that?
Well, you know, it might seem like you want to spread your damage out across all the elements with those gloves.
Yeah, makes sense.
But the real power here comes from focusing on just one.
Interesting. Okay.
Think about it. You could boost your damage for your chosen element by a third just with your gloves.
Okay, so instead of trying to be good at everything, I should pick my favorite element and really go all in on it.
Exactly. You become a specialist.
I like it.
And especially when you start thinking about the support gems you sent over, too.
Oh yeah, the added damage gems.
Oh, right. You've got added cold damage, added fire damage, and added lightning damage.
They all sound perfect with these gloves.
You do. But there's a catch.
I was going to say, there's got to be a downside.
You can only use one of each type of added damage gem.
So the choice we make is going to be super important.
It is. It's all about making the right choices for your build and having everything work together.
Okay, let's get into some specifics. You mentioned some skills that you thought could be good with these gloves. What were they?
Well, for fire builds, rolling magma really stands out.
Rolling magma. I can see it now. Just a giant ball of fire destroying everything.
It's a fiery orb bouncing around, obliterating enemies.
But why rolling magma? Is it just because it's a fire skill, or is there something I'm missing?
It's more than just fire damage. The way rolling magma works is that it deals damage in a bunch of small hits as the orb bounces.
Ah, I see.
And with each of those hits, Painter's Servant converts some of that damage into even more fire damage.
So the more the orb bounces, the more fire damage it does. And then that leads to even bigger explosions.
Exactly, a chain reaction of fire.
Okay, I'm starting to understand why focusing on one element is so strong with those gloves. What about cold builds? Any cool skills there?
For cold, you can't go wrong with Frost Bomb.
Frost Bomb, classic.
It deals a ton of damage up front,
Okay,
but then it chills enemies too.
chills.
Yeah, it slows their life and energy shield regeneration.
So you're not only hitting them with a ton of cold damage, but you're making them weaker to all your attacks after that too.
Exactly.
That sounds super strong.
It is,
Yeah.
especially against tougher enemies.
Okay, last but not least, what about lightning?
For lightning, we've got Lightning Arrow.
Lightning arrow.
It's all about chain reactions. With Lightning Arrow, when your arrow hits an enemy or a wall,
Yeah.
it releases these beams of electricity that can chain to nearby enemies.
Okay, so it can hit a whole group.
Yeah, it's not just single target. It's great for clearing out mobs.
And with the gloves converting some of that to even more lightning damage, those chains are going to hurt.
Oh, yeah.
All right, I'm sold. These gloves sound amazing. But before I go crazy and put every fire, cold, and lightning skill into my build, you mentioned building a well-rounded character. What did you mean by that?
It's easy to get caught up in maximizing damage, but in Path of Exile too.
Yeah.
You have to be able to survive too. Especially with a build like this that's centered around these gloves.
Okay, so how do these gloves make survival harder? I'm curious.
Well, when you're focusing all your energy on one element, you might be neglecting other parts of your character.
Oh, okay, I see. So my defenses might be weaker, or I might not have as much life because I'm putting everything into damage.
Exactly. It's a trade-off.
More damage, more risk.
I get it.
So how do I find that balance? How do I make sure I can dish out the pain but also take it?
That's where build crafting gets really interesting.
Okay.
It's not just about your skills and your gloves. It's about finding ways to make everything work together.
Like what?
Your gear, your passive skill tree, even your playstyle.
Okay, give me an example. Let's say I'm going all in on fire with rolling magma and Painter's Servant. What should I be thinking about on the defense side of things?
Well, you definitely want gear that gives you fire resistance.
It makes sense.
And life regeneration is always good.
Yeah.
And maybe even some armor that reduces damage from spells.
Oh, right. Because the rolling magma orbs are spells.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about my passive skill tree? Are there certain things I should be looking for there?
Definitely. The passive tree is like your toolbox for customizing your character.
I love the passive tree.
For a fire build, you'll want to look for nodes that increase your maximum life
More life is always good.
or boost your fire damage even further,
Double down on the fire.
or even give you more fire resistance.
Okay, so it's about layering those defenses
Yeah.
and finding ways to make my strengths even stronger while protecting my weaknesses.
Exactly.
Like a puzzle.
It is.
You got to find the right pieces and figure out how they fit together.
And don't forget about your playstyle, too.
Oh, right. How I actually play the game.
Even with the best build in the world, if you're not playing smart, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, that's true.
With a build that's all about damage, you have to be careful.
Yeah, you can't just run in and expect to survive.
Positioning and awareness are super important.
So it's not just about the numbers. It's about the strategy behind them.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see the bigger picture now. It's deeper than I thought.
Path of Exile 2 is a game that rewards you for thinking and experimenting.
I like that. It's not about following someone else's build. It's about making your own path.
Exactly.
So speaking of making your own path, you mentioned earlier that there might be a way to use Painter's Servant with multiple elements.
Yeah, the hybridization concept.
I'm really curious about that. Tell me more.
It's risky, but the payoff could be huge.
Okay, I'm listening.
The idea is to embrace the fact that the gloves convert damage to all three elements.
Instead of trying to focus on just one.
Right.
But wouldn't that spread my damage too thin? We already talked about how focusing on one element is the way to get the most out of the gloves.
That's true. But what if we could find a way to make all three elements work together?
That's an interesting thought. But how? Would I need like 3 different sets of added damage gems?
Not necessarily. We need to think outside the box a little.
Okay.
Instead of relying on support gems to boost our damage, we need to find skills that naturally benefit from having multiple elements.
So skills that get stronger when you're dealing different types of elemental damage.
Exactly.
That sounds tricky.
It is. But that's what leads to those really unique and powerful builds that you don't see every day.
Okay, I'm on board. Where do we start? What kind of skills should we be looking at?
One option is to look for skills that have built-in elemental conversion.
So skills that already convert some of their damage to other elements.
Yeah,
How would that work with Painter's Servant? Wouldn't it get messy with all the conversions going on?
it could. But we need to find skills where the conversion lines up with what Painter's Servant already does.
Oh, I see. So like if a skill converts some of its physical damage to fire the gloves, would then convert some of that fire damage to cold and lightning.
Exactly.
And that would give me a skill that deals all 3 elements.
Right.
Okay. But how do we make sure that all 3 elements are actually doing something?
That's the next step. We need to find ways to boost our overall elemental damage.
So instead of specializing in fire or cold or lightning, I need to find ways to become a master of all elements.
Exactly. It's ambitious, but it could be really powerful.
I'm starting to get excited about this.
Yeah.
What kind of skills would be good for this kind of build?
Well, Arc could be interesting.
Arc. Why arc?
It's a lightning spell that chains between enemies.
Kind of like lightning arrow.
Yeah, but Arc can also shock enemies.
And shocked enemies are more vulnerable to lightning damage.
Right, and with Painter's Servant, some of that lightning damage would get converted to fire and cold.
So we could take advantage of those weaknesses too. I like it. What about any cold skills?
Glacial Cascade could be a good one.
Glacial Cascade. I like that skill.
It sends out waves of ice that can hit multiple enemies.
And it can freeze them too.
Exactly.
And frozen enemies are weak to fire.
Right, so you could freeze them with Glacial Cascade and then hit them with a fire spell.
And that fire spell would get boosted by the gloves because they're converting some of the damage to cold and lightning. It's like a chain reaction of elemental destruction.
Exactly.
This is amazing.
And we've only scratched the surface. There's so many other skills and mechanics we could explore.
So our challenge is to find skills that either convert to multiple elements or have some kind of special interaction when you're dealing different types of damage.
Right.
And then we need to find ways to boost our overall elemental damage.
Exactly.
This is going to take some work, but I think it'll be worth it.
I think so too.
This has been a wild ride.
Yeah.
We've gone from talking about focusing on one element to brainstorming ways to use all 3.
And we're just getting started.
I can't wait to get into the game and start experimenting. But before we wrap things up, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all this?
I think the big thing is there's no right or wrong way to build a character in Path of Exile 2.
You got to find what works for you. I like that.
Exactly. So whether you decide to master one element or try a crazy hybrid build, the important thing is to have fun with it.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe you'll discover some amazing new build that nobody's ever thought of before.
That's what I love about this game. There's always something new to discover.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And these painter servant gloves are a perfect example. They make us rethink how we approach builds.
They really do. It's not just about the gloves themselves, it's about the possibilities they open up.
I can't wait to see what kind of crazy builds people come up with.
Me too.
Well, that about wraps things up for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
And happy crafting.
We'll see you next time.